Well, hello again, everyone. It has been a minute since I have done anything on the channel, and I've been meaning to do this video for a while, and I've been slowly kind of creating a list in my head to include, and I'm sure I will do another one of these down the road at some point with an updated list. But for today, I have a list of about, I think it's 9 books and series that I believe are underrated and I would love to see talked about more. This is not to say that they're not talked about at all. I have seen some of these books promoted in various spaces across various social media platforms, and it may be that some of these are more talked about in other circles of social media that I am not a part of because they're not in the genre that I normally read in. So this is not to say that these books are completely unknown or not discussed, but just that I really enjoy them and have enjoyed them in the past, and they really struck a chord with me, and I don't see them talked about nearly as often as I feel they should be talked about. So I want to go ahead and recommend some books for you that I believe are well worth your time and perhaps not something you have encountered before. So I'm going to go through 2 different sections here. I'm going to start with young adults because I do read a lot of young adult and middle grade, and then move into adult. I believe that all the young adult books that I am recommending are series, and for adult I think it's a little bit of both. So I'll clarify if it's series or standalone, you'll be able to see. But yeah, gonna go ahead and begin with YA. So the first series I'm going to be starting with is the Gatekeepers series by Anthony Horowitz, also known as The Power of Five. My copies say The Power of Five, but I believe that is the UK name, and I think The Gatekeepers is the US name. It consists of Book 1, Raven's Gate, Book 2, Evil Star, Book 3, Nightrise, Book 4, Necropolis, and Book 5, Oblivion. This book series I read back in high school, and I've since read it again in my college years, and it spans so many different genres. It is supernatural horror, it's suspense, it's thriller, it's a little bit fantasy, it's kind of all over the board. It's also got a bit of apocalyptic in there, and it's just a really interesting idea. It follows the legend of the Old Ones, so these old beings of chaos, these old entities of chaos that have been sealed away, and the gate is beginning to crack, and the story follows 5 teenagers that are supposed to have the power to stop the Old Ones from being re-released into the world. It's a really interesting series, and it's definitely not everyone's cup of tea. I think I've seen some mixed reviews on it, but it's one of those where just over the years it has really stuck with me. I really loved the characters, I really loved the concept. It did leave quite a mark on me as a teenager. It is the only series where I have actually thrown a book in frustration, but in a good way. I'm not going to say that it's the bad writing, it's that it was so perfectly crafted that when it got to that moment where I was so upset and I threw it, I felt like I should have seen it coming, and it just really upset me, but in a good way. To this day, I have not thrown another book because of my emotional reaction to it, but this one, in the final book, Oblivion, I threw this. And it may be just that it was the age that I read it at, but there are so many elements of this that I feel really hold up to this day. His character work is really interesting, the concepts themselves are really interesting. He does a really good job of balancing all these different conventions within these different genres that he is all kind of melding together. And I remember specifically reflecting on the language of devastation in these books. Horowitz is so talented at giving you an overall landscape of what something is supposed to look like and making you really feel the emotional weight that is attached to it, even as he gives you a bird's eye view. And again, it's an interesting concept, interesting characters, lots of spooks and scares and suspense and thrills, while also being very sneakily emotional. It starts more horror and then progresses more into kind of fantasy, apocalyptic adventure story, but there are still those elements of horror weaved throughout, so I really loved it. I think it is well worth your time, and this is one that I really do not see talked about almost ever, and I think it deserves more love. The second young adult series that I would like to recommend is the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness. It consists of Book 1, The Knife of Never Letting Go, Book 2, The Ask and the Answer, and Book 3, Monsters of Men. So a general synopsis of the series without giving too much away. It is set in sort of a sci-fi dystopian sort of society, and the idea is that all the women have died out and that the only remaining inhabitants of this world are men, and they are all afflicted with this condition where they can hear each other's thoughts at all times, called the noise, capital N, noise. The story follows a boy named Todd Hewitt. He is about to come into his manhood. I believe he's aged 12, about to be 13 or somewhere in that range, but he's about to become a man. He's about to hit maturity. And in the midst of this preparation to become a man, he discovers something extraordinary, and that is that there is a patch of silence in his home village, and in that patch of silence he finds a girl where there shouldn't be one. Overall, I think this is just a really interesting trilogy. It's a really interesting concept. I really love the way Patrick Ness writes. He's got a lovely narrative voice. It is so striking and different and evokes such a sense of emotion no matter what kind of story it is that he's writing. So that really comes across strongly here as well. I love the character work that he does. I was especially taken with Manchi, who is a talking dog. Not actually a talking dog, but you know, we can hear each other's thoughts. Every living creature is afflicted with this condition. So you can hear what Manchi is thinking, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things of the whole series. But beyond that, it is one of those where the stakes do steadily rise as the series goes on. It holds its sense of urgency throughout and continues to ramp up the sense of what is at stake, and it really does have an interesting and poignant commentary on power and those who hold it. So overall, just a really satisfying, unique trilogy, and this is one that I have seen mentioned across various platforms, but not as often as I believe it should be mentioned because it really is a fantastic story. And the final young adult series that I'm going to recommend, I'm so excited to talk about this one because this is one I don't see talked about. It was sitting right there, as you can see. It remains one of my favorite things I have read in the last like 5 years or so. It's incredible. So the last series I am recommending for the young adult category is Lockwood & Co. by Jonathan Stroud, consisting of Book 1, The Screaming Staircase, Book 2, The Whispering Skull, Book 3, The Hollow Boy, Book 4, The Creeping Shadow, and Book 5, The Empty Grave. So the idea behind this book is that there is a ghost epidemic in England and essentially becomes a pest problem. And so there are these major agencies that are dedicated to eliminating spiritual mishaps, spiritual pests. It's essentially this really big corporate industry of pest control. And it follows this independent teenage agency of 3 members. So we have the leader, Anthony Lockwood, his trusty sidekick, George Cubbins, and then our narrator, a spiritually sensitive young girl named Lucy Carlisle, who joins the crew at the beginning of the story. And again, like the idea is that there are these major corporations, these major agencies that you're supposed to be working within, but they are an independent agency and they want to remain independent and address the problem with just as much force and intelligence and bravery as the major agencies do. This series is just so much fun. I had an absolute blast reading it. You have so many fun ghost hunting hijinks. The banter between the characters is so witty and funny. I love the relationship between these 3 characters, and they're all such interesting characters to begin with, and so when you put them all together, it is just a disaster in the best way possible. And there are genuinely so many frightening moments in the series. I think of the opening scene in Book 1, and to this day, it remains one of the creepiest scenes I've ever read, and I remember reading it before bed, and like, I read Stephen King, you know, I read a bunch of other horror novels, and so I've become more acclimated to, you know, spooky scenes, and I used to not read them at night because it would get too in my head, and I've kind of reached a point where that doesn't bother me as much, but I read this first chapter before bed, and I had nightmares that night because it's just so eerie. Jonathan Stroud does such a good job of really getting under your skin with all the little details that he uses and just the way that he sets the scene. It is genuinely so creepy throughout so much of it, and while at the same time being so entertaining and fun. And while it is entertaining and fun, you become so invested in these characters and in the problems that they're facing and the plights that they have. It's such a fantastic series overall. I love the way it develops. I love the way it wraps up. Everything about it I enjoyed, and it felt so perfect for me because growing up I loved adventure novels. I was really into Young Indiana Jones and Magic Treehouse, and I loved Scooby-Doo, so I liked stuff that was vaguely eerie but also a lot of fun. I liked the thrills, I liked the adventure. And then now as an adult, I do read more horror. I love a good ghost story, and so it felt just like the perfect marriage between those 2 selves within me, the adult me that loves the spooky scaries and the younger me that loves the adventure and the thrills with the slightly eerie atmosphere. It's such a fun series, and I genuinely cannot recommend it enough. So moving away from young adult and into the adult section of this video, I just checked and there is actually only 1 series, so I'm going to go ahead and start with that one. So the first series that I'd like to recommend in the adult sphere is the Winternight trilogy by Katherine Arden. So consisting of The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and The Winter of the Witch. The trilogy follows a young girl named, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but I think it's Vasilisa, or Vasya for short, Vasya Petronova, and she lives in this small kind of medieval Russian village. And Vasya has the gift to see household demons. She's very spiritually sensitive. From what I understand, that's more of a common belief and idea in Russian folklore. So the idea is that she can see these household demons and she has a lot of respect and reverence for them. And this gains her the respect of said household demons, but it earns her also the scorn of the Orthodox Church, which is starting to take root in her village. The whole series is so atmospheric and beautifully written. Katherine Arden has such a lovely, poetic narrative voice and tone to what she does. And while it is a joy to read just because it is so pretty and so immersive, that I loved how genuinely nuanced the conflict is. It isn't just this is good and this is bad, that there's such a good representation of sympathetic perspectives on both sides of the conflict. It reminds me a lot of my experience of reading his Dark Materials as a Christian, how there's just a lot of really good moral discussion in there, and we're really unpacking and dealing with some of the complications of religion and faith and what those two mean and how they go in hand, and sometimes how they are in conflict with each other. And a lot of that is in this series as well, while still being this very atmospheric fairy tale-like story, following a wonderful, courageous character who also has a lot of nuance to her. It is darkly whimsical and haunting in a way that inspires more wonder than fear. The next book is The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon. So the story takes place in England in 1976, and it follows young friends Grace and Tilly as they seek to unravel the mysteries surrounding their neighbors on their cul-de-sac after one of their neighbors, Mrs. Creasy, goes missing. I read this book in my child protagonist in adult fiction course in college. This was an independent study I did with a professor of mine, and I think I've talked about this on this channel before. I can't remember exactly when, but I put together this independent study because I was very fascinated by the idea of adult novels that have children at the helm or that are told from a child's perspective. So I read a whole lot of novels within this realm, and a lot of my favorite novels do have that in common, so I was curious to study it. And this was one that I read for the class that I just absolutely fell in love with. It manages to be both a mystery novel and a coming-of-age novel, and the driving element for me overall was that at its heart, it's so much about redemption and reconciliation and learning to not judge others by appearance or rumor, but really looking at the heart of who they are and trying to understand them. And tangled up in all of that too is this idea of what it means to seek truth and to be truthful yourself. So there's a lot wrapped up in this tiny little novel. As you can see, I have all my little tabs. Kind of want to flip open to one and see what I said. Out of context quote, "Don't be ridiculous, lad. Harold Forbes took out his pipe. Those are just superstitions. This is religion." So it's a delightful little book. I love the themes within it, and I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, and it's one that I still think about to this day, having read it years and years and years ago. So, The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon. Next up, I have The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. As you can see, it is very loved, very, very beat up. You can see all my tabs. I read this for college twice in 2 separate classes. One of them was for that same child protagonist and adult fiction course, and my professor ended up loving it so much that she included it in our capstone course the following semester. So I got to read it twice through 2 different lenses, and it's still, to this day, just one of the most striking books that I have come across, and I love it. The Book of Lost Things follows, I believe he's 12, but this boy named David, after his mother has passed away, his father starts seeing somebody new, she gets pregnant, and she gives birth to his half-brother, a little boy named Georgie. And David is feeling extremely isolated, angry, feels that he can only stand the company of his books, but that eventually takes a sinister turn when David starts to hear the books whispering to him at night. And through a series of events, David soon finds himself lost in this fairy tale realm that he calls elsewhere, and he must embark on a quest to find the Book of Lost Things, believing it is his only chance to get home. So we're playing with a lot of traditional fairy tale elements in here. There's a lot of Alice in Wonderland-esque type ideas in here as well, with the getting lost in another world and needing to get home. This book just checks all the boxes for me. It's coming of age, it's dark fantasy, it is a redemptive narrative that doesn't feel cheap. That is something that I have reflected on more and more over the years too, is that I love redemptive stories, but if they don't feel earned, I don't feel that they have earned my praise. This one is redemptive in a way where there has to be hard conversations, there has to be hard encounters. The redemption at the end feels earned and necessary because we went through the grit and the grime of actually coming to terms with the ugly things that our protagonist is facing. This is often marketed as YA because of David's age, but it is a very adult novel. There's a lot of adult things in here, and it is a lot more about the innocence that we lose as we grow up, so not so much YA as adult ideas in here. And among that, it's set in what seems like a childlike background with, traditional heroes and monsters, and we're in a fantasy setting, but it is all very dark and gritty, and so much about coming to terms with having to grow up, with having to lose one's innocence, and what that actually means to mature. It's beautifully done, haunting, so many good ideas in here, great character work. I loved what this book was doing thematically, I loved what it was doing atmospherically. Everything about it is just so haunting, similar to the way that the Winternight trilogy is with its atmosphere and its language, but in a way that it just makes you think about your own growing up and the importance of what real maturity looks like and what it means. So, The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. The book that I have up next, I think is probably more popular than I see in my own sphere of reading because it is historical fiction and I'm not so much in the historical fiction discussions online. I'm sure it is ranted and raved about there, but not so much in my fantasy sci-fi realm. But anyway, I'm sure you probably heard of it. If not, happy to introduce you, but next up is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It says here, at the beginning of the 12th century in England, it follows this village over the course of decades as they work towards constructing a cathedral. That's the story. It sounds like nothing, but the drama, the character work, the twists and turns that happen around the task of building this cathedral are incredible. You will be so invested in the progress of the building of the cathedral. You will be so invested in the characters' stories as they progress and develop in tandem with the cathedral. It is one of the best books I have read. And to this day, it has both one of my most loved characters that I've come across in fiction and one of my most hated characters that I've come across in fiction. So that really is the strength of this book, is its character work. Ken Follett does such a good job of really presenting these characters as so human and making their lives so interesting that you cannot help but to become invested and want to know what's going to happen to them. It is a long book. It is a bigger commitment. It is over 1,000 pages, or at least my copy is, but the character work is just marvelous and the emotional payoff in the end is so worth it. Second to last, I have The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. This is set in Alaska in about 1920, and it follows a husband and wife, Jack and Mabel, as they move to Alaska to begin homesteading. They are really struggling in their marriage. Mabel feels really emotionally isolated, something that is mirrored in the landscape that they are in. Jack feels overwhelmed by the task of caring for his wife and caring for this homestead that they have taken on for themselves. So they are really struggling in their marriage and drifting farther and farther apart from each other. And one day, in a rare moment of connection between them, they build a little child out of snow. And the next morning, they find that the little snow child is gone, but in its place, they find a young girl who calls herself Faina, running around through the woods, seemingly belonging to nobody. The Snow Child is whimsical, hopeful, and achingly sad all at once. It has all the elements of a classic fairy tale while also focusing on the elements of the struggle between this couple and the difficult life that they have set out to share. It's been a long time since I've read it, so there really is only so much that I can say about it, but it is one that just, it lingers and it really left an impression on me. Even though it is whimsical and fairy tale-ish, it feels so human at its core. And then lastly, and this is another one that I believe is more talked about and more acclaimed, but I don't see it mentioned very often, so wanted to talk about this one as well, is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. It's very short, as you can see. It follows an unnamed woman who lives her life for social media. She is constantly posting, she is chronically online, and she's constantly arranging her life around her position in the online community. But her life changes after the birth of her niece, who is born with a rare disorder that leaves her physically deformed. To be honest, I struggled with the first half of this book. The first half of this book, I thought I would maybe give it a 3-star rating. I wasn't super invested. It was an interesting idea and an interesting format, but I felt really suffocated by being in this character's head all the time and being constantly in her thoughts, constantly in this strange format of being in an online platform. So I really struggled with it for the first half, but in the second half, after her niece is born, I just about cried, and I don't often cry when I'm reading books. That's something I have to clarify for people, is I cry a lot in shows, in movies. I don't often cry when I'm actually just physically reading a book, but this one nearly brought me to tears. The story is many things, but for me, I felt that at its core, it was about learning what really matters in life, what to prioritize, what really genuinely loving someone means and what that looks like, especially because to really genuinely love someone is difficult and requires sacrifice, but you do it with your whole heart because you love them. So it's a really just beautiful story about love of another and about, again, prioritizing what really matters in life, especially in a world that is so dominated by the online space, which can be very beneficial, but also detract a lot from human connection. So I thought the heart of this was really lovely. I was ultimately super impressed by it and super touched by it. And the format is really unique and interesting, and it is very clear to me why this has such acclaim. I believe it won a few awards or was nominated for several. Either way, highly acclaimed and rightfully so. It is a very captivating, interesting, well-written story. And that is all from me. I have rambled on long enough. If you have read any of these books, I would really love to chat more about them. Again, these are books that I have seen discussed sometimes in the online space, but not often. Most of the time, I don't see these recommended, so I really would love to hear your thoughts and pick your brain and talk about what you thought of them, because they all hold a special place place in my heart in one way or another. I don't have anything on the horizon right now for the channel. I am trying to figure out what comes next as far as video making goes, but I do pretty consistently update on Instagram and Goodreads, so if you are interested in hearing my thoughts on what I'm reading, what I'm up to, those links are below and you can follow me there as well. And if you like this kind of content and would like to see what else I have coming out in the future, you can also subscribe below. But as always, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening to me rant about the things that I love to read. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on these books if you have any. But until the next time, happy reading, happy writing, and I will chat with you all soon.